The bungalow I bought last February sits on a quiet crescent in Red Deer, about 4 blocks from the River Valley trails. It has a wide deck in the backyard, a birch tree out front that turns a particular shade of gold every October, and flower beds along the fence that take some real work each spring, but earn it back every time. I didn't buy it for myself. I bought it for the woman who handed me a spare key and a bowl of soup the evening I showed up at her door, with 2 duffel bags and nowhere left to be. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this story actually starts. Not the good part, the part so I still feel in my chest when the weather turns cold and the days get short. I was 27 years old and living in a basement suite in Edmonton's Strathcona neighborhood. 500 square feet, low ceilings, one small window above the laundry machine that looked out at a concrete wall. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine, my name on the lease, my bills, my responsibility to manage. I worked the morning shift in the cafeteria of a hospital on the south side, and 3 evenings a week I worked retail at the mall. I wasn't comfortable, exactly, but I was handling it on my own, and at 27, that mattered to me in a way that's hard to explain, unless you've spent a long time needing to prove something to yourself. Then, in the first week of November, my landlord handed me a letter. He had sold the property to a developer. The entire building was being converted. I had 60 days to find somewhere new. I want to be clear about something. I had never missed a payment in 2 years. I had never given him a single reason to want me gone. I did everything right, and it still didn't matter, because someone looked at the land my home was sitting on and decided it was worth more emptied out. 60 days to dismantle and relocate my life, not for anything I did, but because I'd been renting from someone who treated the building like a holding account, instead of a place where people lived. I started applying for new units immediately. The rental market in Edmonton that fall was unforgiving. Low vacancy, prices climbing, landlords asking for security deposits, and full months of income documentation and credit checks that made no sense for someone working 2 jobs and paying their bills on time. On paper, I looked like a risk I wasn't. 2 part-time incomes don't stack up the way a single full-time salary does, even when the number at the end of the month is the same. I got rejections for 2 weeks straight. So I did what most people do when they've exhausted the options in front of them. I called my mother. She lives in Sherwood Park, about half an hour east of the city, in a house she and my stepfather have owned for going on 15 years. 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, a finished basement they've always called the rec room, where nothing in particular happens except storage and the occasional hockey game, on a screen that's too large for the space. Not wealthy people, comfortable people. Stable in a way I was clearly not, right at that moment. I called on a Wednesday night and walked her through the whole situation. The notice, the applications, the deposit problem, the timeline. I told her I needed a place to stay for 6 to 8 weeks, maybe 10 at the outside, just a landing point. Somewhere to be while I sorted things out. I wasn't asking for money. I wasn't asking her to fix anything. I just needed a room for 2 months. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't know, sweetheart. Your stepfather and I have our routines. Having someone in the house would be a big adjustment for us." I thought I must have explained it poorly, so I tried again. 6 weeks, 8 at most. I already had a plan. And she said, "You've always been so independent, though. You'll land on your feet. You always do." I stood in my kitchen, the one I was about to lose, and I felt something go completely still inside me. She wasn't saying no because she couldn't help. The room was right there. The house was right there. She was saying no because she didn't want her routine disrupted, and my homelessness was simply inconvenient for her schedule. That was the whole calculation. Her mornings with her coffee, her evenings without anyone else in the house, her stepfather's habits undisturbed, and her daughter could figure the rest out on her own, because her daughter was resourceful and independent, and always landed on her feet. I said okay. I told her I understood. I hung up. And then I sat down on the floor of my kitchen, and cried harder than I had in years. Not entirely because I was surprised. My mother and I had never been particularly close, and I had long since stopped expecting warmth to arrive automatically. But I think there is some part of you, no matter how old you get, or how many times you've been disappointed, that still holds a small and stubborn belief that in an actual emergency, the people who are supposed to show up will show up. That belief died quietly on the floor of my kitchen in November. 2 days later, my brother called from Calgary. He'd heard through the family somehow. I thought maybe he was reaching out to help. Instead, the first thing he said was, "Didn't you have 2 jobs? What happened to all that?" I told him I was handling it and got off the phone. For the next 5 nights, I slept in my car. I need you to understand what that actually means in Edmonton in November. This isn't mild. The temperature dropped to -18 on one of those nights. I ran the engine for 20 minutes at a stretch to get the heat up, then turned it off to save gas, waited until I couldn't feel my feet anymore, then ran it again. I parked in the lot of a 24-hour grocery store because it was lit. And there were always a few other cars, and that made me feel slightly less alone, in a way that's pathetic, only if you've never needed it. I made a curtain out of a folded blanket for the back windows. I kept my work uniform in a bag on the passenger seat, and changed in a single-stall washroom at a Tim Hortons every morning before my hospital shift. And I smiled at my coworkers like nothing was happening, because I could not bear for anyone to know. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I need you to understand what it actually feels like when the people who were supposed to show up choose not to. It is not just the cold, though the cold is real, and it gets inside you in a particular way. It's the feeling of being invisible, of watching the world keep moving along its normal course, while yours has quietly gone off the rails, and realizing that to almost everyone in your life, the difference is barely worth a phone call. On the 6th night, I got a text. My Aunt Colleen is my father's older sister. My father died when I was 9, a heart attack, fast, 3 weeks before Christmas, and after that, his side of the family mostly drifted in the way that families sometimes do when the person who held them together is suddenly gone. My aunt never fully drifted. She sent birthday cards every year without fail. She called on the anniversary of my father's passing, always, even if only to leave a short voicemail saying she was thinking of us. She remembered small things. What I was studying, where I was working, what I'd mentioned the last time we'd spoken. There was nothing dramatic about her presence in my life. Just consistent and quiet, like a light left on in a window that you don't realize you've been navigating by until you really need it. The text she sent said, I heard you're in a rough spot. My spare room is sitting empty and it's yours if you need it. No conditions. I mean it. I read it 4 or 5 times. I kept waiting for the asterisk, the clause, the well-meaning but there wasn't one. She lives in Red Deer, an hour and a half south of Edmonton on the QEII. I drove down that same afternoon. She opened the front door before I had made it up the steps. She'd looked at me, at the bags, at my face, at whatever she could read there that I hadn't said, and the very first thing she said was, Have you had supper yet? I hadn't. She made beef and barley soup from scratch, the kind that takes an hour at least, and we sat at her kitchen table while it cooked, and while we ate it, and for a long time after. She let me talk. Everything. My mother, the parking lot, the cold, the shame of washing my face in a Tim Hortons every morning before work, the fear that I had done something fundamentally wrong even though I couldn't name what it was. She didn't cut in. She didn't pivot to advice. She didn't tell me it would all work out or remind me of silver linings I wasn't ready to see. She just sat with her tea across from me and listened with her full attention, which is rarer than most people realize. And when I finally ran out of words, she topped up my cup and said, The room at the end of the hall is yours. There are towels in the linen closet. You stay until you're steady again. That's the whole deal. I slept in a real bed that night for the first time in almost a week. I cried again, but it was different from before. Before had been grief and humiliation and the specific pain of being failed by someone who should have known better. That night was something else entirely. It was relief. It was the disorienting feeling of being caught by someone you hadn't expected to catch you, of discovering that the net was real even when you couldn't see it. My aunt worked as an administrative coordinator at a medical clinic in the city. She'd been there for over a decade, knew the place inside and out, was exactly the kind of person who makes an operation run, without anyone stopping to notice how. She had her life, her Saturday morning walks along the river, her Wednesday evenings with her church group, her garden in the backyard, that she tended with real commitment and real pride. And she folded me into all of it without once, not once, making me feel like a disruption or a weight. About 3 weeks after I moved in, she mentioned over dinner, very casually, that she had spoken with someone from her congregation, a woman who managed a small property management company, and was looking for a full-time office coordinator. I put your name in, she said. Like it was nothing, like making a phone call for someone she loved was simply the obvious thing to do. I interviewed 4 days later. I got the position. The salary was higher than my 2 part-time jobs combined had been paying me. I want to stop there for a moment, because that sentence doesn't fully carry the weight of what that job actually was. That job, that single phone call my aunt made on my behalf, is the thread that, when I pull it now, unravels into every good thing that happened to me afterward. She didn't loan me money. She didn't fix the problem for me. She made one call to one person she knew and trusted, because that is what you do when you love someone and you have something to offer. I stayed in my aunt's spare room for 7 months. Those months were not uncomplicated. There were days when the gap between where I was and where I thought I would be at 27 felt enormous and humiliating. There were evenings I sat on the edge of the guest bed staring at nothing, thinking about my mother's voice on the phone, so calm, so certain that I would manage. and feeling something that wasn't quite anger but lived right next to it. There were nights I lay awake doing the math on how long it would take me to save a deposit, and first month's rent on a new place, and wondering whether the number would ever actually arrive. But then morning would come, and my aunt would have the kettle on, and she'd ask how I slept or what I had on that day, genuinely, like my answer was the most interesting thing going on in her morning, and something would settle back down inside me. I moved into my own apartment in Red Deer in late spring, first and last months covered from savings I'd managed to set aside. My name on the lease. I stood in the empty living room the day I moved in. Beige walls, dated light fixtures, a view of the parking lot, and I felt something I hadn't felt in almost a year. Steady. Not happy exactly, not yet, but solid underneath. I kept going. I enrolled in the courses to get my property management license through RECA, and studied at nights and on weekends until I passed. I took on more responsibility at the company because I understood from the inside what it meant to be on the tenant side of that relationship. I knew what it felt like to need stable housing, and hit a wall of paperwork and deposits and income requirements. That knowledge shaped the way I worked. I think it made me better at the job than I would have been otherwise. There was a stretch in my second year when I came close to giving up on the idea of ever doing anything bigger. The hours were long, my savings were moving slower than I'd projected, and someone I had trusted in a professional context let me down badly enough that I had to start part of a plan over from scratch. I remember sitting in my apartment on a Tuesday night in January with my laptop open, looking at a spreadsheet that didn't add up the way I needed it to, and thinking very seriously about whether I should just stop trying to build something and settle into the career I already had. It was a good job, a stable job. Maybe that was enough. I thought about my aunt's kitchen table, about the way she had refilled my cup and said, "You stay until you're steady." Like steadiness was something she had complete faith I would eventually find. You don't give up, I decided, when someone has already invested that kind of quiet belief in you. It doesn't feel right, so I closed the spreadsheet and went to sleep, and came back to it the next morning. By 32, I had built enough to make a real move. I partnered with two people I had come to trust over years in the same industry. We secured financing and acquired a small portfolio of residential rental properties across central Alberta. The market was right. We knew it well, and I brought something to the work that I couldn't have named at the outset but understood clearly by then. I treated every property in the portfolio like someone's home, because I knew exactly what it meant to someone when it was. We did well, better than I'd modeled for. Within 2 years, things had shifted in a way I still find hard to fully account for when I look back at where I started. That's when I started thinking about the house. I had driven past a property on a crescent near the river valley in Red Deer a handful of times over the years. A bungalow, 3 bedrooms, back deck, updated kitchen. A birch tree out front, not dramatic, just steady and quiet, and the particular shade of gold in October that I had always noticed from the road. It had been listed for a few months without selling. I knew who I was buying it for before I made the first call. I purchased it in February. I took my time with the details before I said anything to anyone. The deck furniture I chose carefully, because my aunt had mentioned once, offhand years back, the way people mention things they've half given up on. That she had always wanted a deck big enough for a proper table and chairs where she could have her morning coffee looking at something green instead of a fence or a wall. I remembered that. I don't think she remembered saying it. I had the flower beds planted along the fence before spring, so they'd have time to take hold. I organized a dinner in Edmonton and told everyone it was to celebrate some business news. Which was true, just not entirely. My mother came. My stepfather came. My brother drove up from Calgary. My aunt arrived in a green jacket she saves for occasions she considers worth the effort, and she called me on the way to ask if she should stop and pick up anything. Dinner was warm on the surface, careful underneath. The way family dinners sometimes are when there's a long catalog of things that have never been said. My mother was attentive that night, present in the particular way she gets when she wants to be seen as involved. At some point she leaned across and put a hand on my arm and said, "I always knew you had it in you. You just needed time to come into yourself." I looked at her. I didn't say, "You told me to land on my feet when I was running a car engine to stay warm in a parking lot." I didn't say, "Everything I came into started in a spare room that wasn't yours to offer." I just smiled and said, "I had the right people in my corner at the right moments." My aunt looked at me from across the table. She has known me long enough to hear exactly what I'm not saying. After the main course, I got up and came back with a small wooden box I'd set near the entrance when we arrived. Flat, white painted, with small green leaves stenciled along the lid, because green is my aunt's color, and has been for as long as I can remember. I set it in front of her. She laughed a little, uncertain. "What on earth is this?" "Open it." She lifted the lid inside, A key on a plain ring, and a folded piece of paper with an address on it. A crescent in red deer, a birch tree, a back deck with room for a proper table and chairs. She went very still. "Colleen," I said, "it's yours. The deed is already in your name. It's been yours since the night you texted me." She looked up. Her eyes were already full. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, you can't. I already did." She sat there for a moment with her hand over her mouth, and then she started to cry. Not composedly, but the real kind, the involuntary kind, the kind you can't prepare your face for. She kept shaking her head, like she was going to argue with me about it, and I kept looking at her steadily until eventually Reed reached across the table and took my hand in both of hers and held on. The room was very quiet. My mother was sitting completely still on the other side of the table. I looked at her when things had settled. Not with anger. I had done a lot of work over a lot of years to make peace with who she is and what she couldn't give me, and I had largely gotten there. But I looked at her clearly, and I said, "Everything I built started in my aunt's spare room and at her kitchen table. I just wanted to make sure she knew I knew that." My mother nodded very slowly. She didn't say anything. It was the first time I had seen her with nothing to redirect or reframe. Just sitting with the full weight of what she had chosen when she chose her routine. We moved my aunt into the house on a Saturday in late March. She came over a few weekends in a row, a carload at a time, and we found places for everything. Her books on the built-in shelves, her good dishes in the cabinet above the counter, a framed photograph of her and my father as teenagers on the mantel, the two of them laughing at something outside the frame. We stood back and looked at it once it was level. Neither of us said anything for a moment. That afternoon we sat on the back deck with 2 cups of tea. The birch tree was just starting to bud. The flower beds along the fence had small early color in them. A neighbor's dog started up somewhere down the crescent and then quieted. The sun was doing something good with the light through the branches. My aunt set her mug down and looked at me. "Tell me why you actually did this," she said. "The real reason." So I told her the truth. Because 7 years ago, I was sleeping in my car in a grocery store parking lot, in -18 weather, and you sent me a text that said, "Come whenever you're ready," like it was the most natural thing in the world. No conditions, no asterisk, and I have been building on that ever since, on the fact that you showed up. Not because you had to. Not because it was convenient. Just because it was obviously the right thing, and you are someone who does the obvious right thing without needing to be asked. And I wanted you to have something that was built on it. Something with your name on it that lasts. She was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, "Your dad would have gotten such a kick out of all of this." We both laughed, and then we were both a little teary, and we didn't say much else for a while. Just sat with our tea while the afternoon settled around us, and the birds my aunt had already hung a feeder for moved back and forth in the birch tree above the yard. There are people who come through your life because of timing or obligation or convenience. And there are people who come through because they choose to. Quietly, without announcement, without anything to gain, when nobody is paying particular attention. They see you at your lowest and decide simply that you are worth the room. My mother chose her routine, my aunt chose me. And choices don't stay small. They compound. They grow in the direction you point them, and become, over enough time, the whole shape of a life. My mother's choice left her sitting in silence while someone else received a key to a house. My aunt's choice led to a back deck, in red deer, a birch tree going gold in October, and a daughter not by blood but by decision, who will spend the rest of her life making sure she knows exactly what she built. If someone stepped up for you, when the people who were supposed to stepped back. If someone texted you or called you or opened a door for you, when you had nowhere left to go, leave a comment that says she showed up, or he showed up, or they showed up. Because some people need to know that it happens, that there are people in this world who, when it matters, simply do the obvious right thing, who ask if you've eaten yet, who mean it when they say come whenever you're ready. The right person will surprise you. They almost always come from somewhere you didn't expect. But they show up,